Good morning. My name is Bob Watson. I have been the former chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the former chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and I co-chaired 2 United Kingdom assessments of biodiversity when I worked for the UK government around the year 2010. It's my true pleasure to talk to you this morning about the critical issue of biodiversity. It's a pleasure to talk to a citizens' assembly, to hear the voice of local people. So the first question is, what is biodiversity? Well, it's the animals, it's the plants, it's the genetic diversity, it's the populations of these species, and it's the ecosystems, the forests of the world, the grasslands, coral reefs, mangrove swamp, peatlands, a crucial ecosystem in Ireland. And the question really is, why do we care? Well, we obviously care about nature. We love our animals, we love our plants. But even more important, our ecosystems, nature, biodiversity, provides provisioning services to us. It helps to provide the food we eat, the water we drink, the energy we use, the wood we use. These are so-called provisioning services. They provide us, the public, with all of these services. But they do much more. They regulate our climate. They regulate the quality of our water. They control pests and diseases. They control pollution. They control floods. They also provide cultural services, the aesthetic value of walking through a forest, walking by a river. They also provide us knowledge and inspiration. So these ecosystems are critically important to us. The problem is we're destroying them, not only in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Europe, in developing countries, but across the world. We're losing our forests, our grasslands, our peatlands, our wetlands. Why? Well, we've exploited these ecosystems for things we need, our food, our water, our energy. The trouble is with the way we've produced our energy, the way we've produced our food, the way we've produced the wood we need has actually led to a complete loss of the regulating services I mentioned and the cultural services all over the world. We have already transformed 75% of the ice-free land throughout the world. Our cities, our roads, our monoculture agriculture, our plantation forests. We've actually disturbed 66% of the world's oceans, partially due to overfishing. We've lost 85% of our wetlands, which include the peatlands. We project, unless we do something different, by 2050, we will have lost 90%, or at least transformed, I should say, 90% of the land's surface. Only about 10% will be near natural. A recent assessment that I helped to chair projects that we will have 1 million species out of the total 8.2 million species on Earth threatened with extinction in the next 100 to 150 years unless we act now. This is 12%, 13% of all species could go extinct. So what's causing this? Well, we've got a population that's increasing all over the world. The world is becoming wealthier. And therefore, when you have more people and wealthier people, they demand more goods and services. They demand and need more food. They need more water. They need more energy. They need more wood. They need more medicines. And the problem is, as I mentioned earlier, it's the way we're producing our food that is causing a major loss of biodiversity. Also, our institutions and our government structures are unfortunately not appropriate for the challenges that we have today and lie ahead for our children and grandchildren. So the 5 direct drivers that cause the loss of biodiversity, cause the destruction of nature, are land use change or sea use change, the exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. On land use, we've transformed our forests, we've transformed our grasslands into monoculture agriculture at the loss of biodiversity and species. We've overexploited our land in the way we produce our food, and in the oceans we've overfished, as I mentioned earlier. We're seeing climate change caused by us, the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas to produce our energy. We pollute. When we produce our agriculture, we have runoff of agricultural chemicals that pollute our rivers, our lakes and our oceans. We also pollute our air and put our chemicals into our air, which are also bad for human health. And we bring species in from one part of the world to another part of the world, and they go in competition with local species and lead to the loss of local species. So these are the major drivers. Now, as I mentioned, climate change has been a driver, a cause of biodiversity loss, but it's not been the major cause. The 2 dominant causes to date are land use change and exploitation of our ecosystems. But climate change could become the largest driver of loss of biodiversity in the coming decades. So unless we meet the international goal, which was established in Paris a few years ago, of limiting human-induced climate change to much less than 2 degrees Celsius, and preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius, then climate change is likely to become the dominant driver of biodiversity loss in most parts of the world. Unfortunately, the government policies and commitments to date to limit climate change to less than 2 degrees Celsius are inadequate. Unfortunately, we need to reduce our emissions of carbon dioxide by 50% between now and 2030 at the global level. That will potentially put us on a path for 1.5. But where are we? Our current policies and our current pledges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions put us on a pathway to about 3.2 degrees Celsius by 2100. We clearly have to become a low carbon economy. We need to produce our energy more cleanly. We need to use our energy more cleanly. It will be good for biodiversity. So the issues of climate change and biodiversity are strongly coupled. We need policies and technologies and practices and behaviour changes that deal with climate change and biodiversity together. They can no longer be considered separate issues. Now, in about 2010, governments around the world pledged to save and conserve biodiversity. They had 20 goals and a series of targets. Unfortunately, by 2020, we'd made some progress on some of the goals and targets, but to be honest, none of the goals or targets were fully met across the world. So while some progress was made on some issues, unfortunately on some parts, we actually went backwards. We have not dealt with the direct drivers of climate change, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Now the question is, can we consider climate change and biodiversity simply environmental issues? The answer is no. They're development issues. They affect poverty, food security, water security, energy security, and human health. They are economic issues. Climate change causes economic damage, and it is cheaper to mitigate climate change than to adapt to climate change. And biodiversity has economic value. Not all of it is in the market. Much of it is actually what we call non-market. regulating services such as climate change and pollution, flood control, have no market value, but they have incredible economic value to you and me. There are also security issues. In many parts of the world, the loss of biodiversity means less food, less clean water, and it leads to conflict in many parts of the world. There's also equity issues. It's the rich industrialized countries that have caused the problem predominantly. Yet it is poor people, especially in developing countries, that suffer most. It's also the old and the poor, the disenfranchised, that suffer most from biodiversity loss and climate change. And there's a moral issue. Do we humans have the right to destroy nature? So as I've said, these are not simply environmental issues. Now, we've made progress for a better world in the last 50 years. We have less people in poverty, less people that go hungry, better health. But we still have 1.3 billion people that remain poor. We still have over 700 million go to bed hungry every night. And the COVID crisis, the COVID pandemic, has caused an additional 100 million people to go hungry every night. As I've already said, environmental damage affects the poor, the old, the young. And it's the wealthy amongst us, the middle class, the rich. We have the largest footprint on the environment, and we need to change the way we live. 1/4 of the global burden of disease is due to environmental risks. The COVID pandemic can be traced back to an interaction between humans and wild animals. So we have to be careful in our interactions with wild animals in the wild and in wet markets. And indeed, environmental degradation is indeed threatening food security, water security. So there is no question the so-called United Nations sustainability goals are all being threatened. Food for everyone, no more poverty, energy for everyone, gender equality, a more equal world. All of these things are at risk due to climate change and loss of biodiversity. So what do we need to do? We need to conserve the biodiversity that we still have and restore some of the biodiversity that we've already lost. Restore some of the degraded wetlands. Restore areas that are once forested and no longer forests. So we need to restore and conserve. But to do this, we need to address the way we manage our land, the way we manage our sea. We need to look at the way we exploit the land and the oceans. We need to limit climate change. We need to limit pollution, and we limit invasive alien species. All of these are possible. But this does mean that governments, working with the private sector, working with the financial services, and working with us, the general public, through processes such as the citizens' assemblies, we need to transform our economic, our financial, and our productive systems. We use gross domestic product to measure economic growth, but it doesn't measure sustainable economic growth. It measures unsustainable economic growth. Nature has value, economic value and social value, as I've already mentioned. Therefore, we need to take into account when we make decisions, natural capital. The other forms of capital that are very important are human capital, educated people, people that can work and earn a livelihood. We need to bring in built capital, the technologies that we use, our cities, our roads. So if we want to measure sustainability, we need to take into account the value of nature. But many governments around the world have what we call subsidies. They subsidize agriculture, unsustainable energy, mining, fisheries. Many of these are very unsustainable They don't help poor people, and they lead to environmental degradation. They lead and encourage deforestation. They lead and encourage the use of fossil fuels. So we have to look at the whole subsidy system, and we have to use that money for sustainable agriculture, sustainable forestry, sustainable fisheries, and of course, a low carbon or a sustainable energy system. We need to recognise that when you price a good, it needs to incorporate all the social and economic values. We underprice coal, oil and gas. We actually underprice food. Now, I'm not saying the price of all these commodities should go up. The middle class can probably afford to pay a little bit more, but we would need social safety nets for poor people to make sure they get the water they need, the food they need, the energy they need. And this can be done with good, sensitive, socially acceptable and fair and equitable policies by governments. And obviously we need to invest our money. The banks, the pension funds, the insurance companies can all effectively invest in a transition to a sustainable future. And therefore, we also need to look at the way we produce our food, the way we produce and use our water and our energy systems. These systems are all interconnected. To grow food, we need water and we need energy. And so we can no longer think of our energy, water and food systems as separate systems. They need to be managed today. But we as individuals, you and me, we need to play our role. We can reduce our food waste, our water waste, our energy waste. We can use all of these things much more sustainably in the future as governments and the private sector develop the technologies and policies to make us much more sustainable. So in conclusion, what would I say? We need to transform the governance systems of the world. Every voice needs to be heard. And that's why I'm so pleased that countries around the world have started to have citizens' assemblies such as yours. Now, I know of no other citizen assembly to date for biodiversity. There was a global citizen assembly that I interacted with on climate change at COP26 in Glasgow. I know that France and Scotland and England also had citizens' assemblies for climate change, but I don't know of anyone for biodiversity. It is so important, not only the governments of the world, but the private sector of the world understand your desires, your visions for the future, your vision for your children and their grandchildren. And so what you're starting on, this journey that you're starting on to discuss the issue of biodiversity, and you need to also discuss climate change at the same time because they are fully interactive. I am so pleased that you're taking on this challenge. So when you think of biodiversity, the future you want, think of it in terms of the food you need, the water you need, the energy you need, walking by a stream, walking in a forest, being on the beach, enjoying nature. So if I had to summarize all of this, I would say biodiversity, nature, is central to human well-being. And we humans are destroying it. And therefore we're undermining our own future. We need to transform our economic systems, and we have to recognize the economic and social value of nature and incorporate that in decision making. We need to recognize that biodiversity is central to all development issues and is not just simply an environmental issue. As I said earlier, it's a development, economic, social security, moral and ethical issue. Current activities by governments and the private sector around the world are not yet adequate. They both actually recognise the importance of biodiversity and they both recognise the importance of climate change, but their policies and their activities are still unsustainable. And therefore the messages that you will develop in your citizens' assembly, your messages to government, your messages to the private sector are really very, very important. You need to tell them what is the world you want for you and your children. Transformative change is needed. The socially acceptable and economically cost-effective policies and technologies are available. Yes, we need more research, but we know enough today to become sustainable and protect human well-being. I'm really so pleased that you are all starting on this journey. I wish you really good luck. Thank you and goodbye.